just took their.
So did you,
Yeah.
was it more risky?
They started fishing, so another woman. Got picked up by the same ship. But that wasn't the ships we were on. And, they started to fish. So we said, come on, let's go down in the factory and start sampling. Okay, we might as well. And, because she had been as a observer. Sure that she.
Janet already got to hear it.
Yeah, none of the fishery folks were also gathering up some stories that. So. And the different fishery stories.
That's fantastic. Do you publish them or are they just essentially for yourself?
Afghanistan,
Hi Nancy, can you hear us?
Pakistan, and
Oh,
didn't like
you're
Pakistan.
muted.
And there were a lot of people at the border.
See if I can-
And we could see that they were leaving Pakistan,
There, try now.
but
Can you hear me now?
they were saying that they leaving India.
We're hearing Janet's amazing stories
So-
of her world travel.
And that wasn't right. We saw it, you know. And I joined the they were in Delhi and everything, and they were preparing for this was the war in Pakistan and India. Yeah. Bangladesh was created. We tried to get there, the intention, we were going to go on a bus across the border into Nepal. But because of the monsoon rains, and it must have been really bad. There was just a big swamp and there were just all these trucks both sides of this. So we had to end up flying from India to Nepal. And the war broke out soon after we got to Nepal. So, and what do you do? You know, they got most of their fuel from India. So they didn't have much way, you know, transportation available where they got there. So we kind of walked around to the different embassies just to find out what the news was. Got invited to a wedding. Finally, war was over. Back to a number of us went back to India. Went on to Sri Lanka country. And the friend that I was with was going on to, she flew on to Australia to be a teacher. And I flew to Singapore and then took the train, Niue Peninsula, stopped at Penang. And to Bangkok. Went to the, I was booked to have they had to change the freighter. I was going to take a freighter back to the West Coast. And when I got there, they said, oh, well, it's been delayed, so it'll be another 2 weeks. Oh, great, and I've got 2 weeks to travel. So we went up north and
Wow.
boy, there were all these army, because oh my goodness, am I going into a war zone? This is army.
Yeah, there we go.
Good.
An extraordinary amount of travel.
Yeah. You're
So
gonna get into.
we are taking action on this,
Yeah.
correct?
So my plan was to present the report and then go through the self-analysis results and then vote at the very end. So
Okay.
folks have a chance to hear the results of it,
Yeah, that makes
if
sense.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Even though it's kind of jumped back. So, oh, yeah, pretty straightforward.
Okay.
And then besides the vote, just taking input.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds great.
And let's see, story after. Okay.
Okay.
You want some stuff? Oh, good. Pumpkin bread, we can put it back here. Thank you. One of the pumpkin bread does, almond. Your chick? You wrap it.
I thought about it all day.
Looks like you guys are making good progress on the high school zone there, and I ran by there early this week. Yeah, I keep on seeing that spot getting wider and wider where there's not blackberry and stuff.
We've been working on Blackbird, that's what I've been working. A local park and property.
Yeah,
And
They,
they're
just
fun.
keep going, don't they? I actually like them. I like,
oh, I like to eat.
This time of year,
But,
it's better. It's hard. Summer, it's tougher.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you took that. That was a spot that I pointed out to Dan. It's like, someone should take this. It's like getting out of hand. Yeah, no, I think because it was right before, I think you were shortly before, so I think I had maybe a small part to play in that.
It's fun with the new focus of, clearing out, focusing on land to clear out the trees and understory,
Yeah.
showing that fun too.
Yeah,
That makes it more fun. too.
yeah, no. multiple
Everybody else
benefits.
too, I think. I mean, I was already saying it, but it's amping up. This, you guys gonna get some treats? Who's eat?
Yeah.
It makes it fun though when we have big work parties and.
Day, between yesterday, it was very good.
You're making amazing progress too.
Slow down since my last night.
Oh, it does.
We made she ended up bowing out, so I feel like I gotta get some momentum back. But no, it's been cool to see that.
Find yourself in a department.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, that might be the answer.
Have you been? Busy.
Yeah. Wild time.
This is a busier season, but the holidays.
Just like jump on the train and hang on.
Thanks for coming.
She's not.
Yes. Do you sell children's clothes? Yeah, that is. I don't think if I know. Just like do you have a store that you can walk into or?
Yeah, there's a store, so we went in a lot and then Kirkland, right by the.
Oh. Where's the one in Issaquah?
We did try.
On Gilman, like UFC.
Okay, cool. Check it out.
Yeah, it's exciting. We're on this, our mission is to keep every piece of children's clothing out of plant.
I
And
love
so
it.
we partnered with Goodwill. They did a collection.
Can I ask you
Sure.
So it's that.
It does.
Yeah.
Feature category.
Uh-huh.
Like it's one of
Wow.
Wow.
She's like, so I've a bunch of shit as a PDF. We're like, oh, let me find your original. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And she's like, so I have 40 of them. I'm like, okay, well, we will make a new plan.
Oh, man.
More stores.
It's been a lot of sorting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
It's an awful lot.
Nice, good. They're doing good. They're doing good things. So nice to be part.
Mhm. That is cool.
How many stores do you have?
You know.
Four. Are you primarily at the Issaquah one or do you move around?
Right now, but I go.
You're there every time I go.
It's my baby.
Is it? Was it the first one?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's been
okay.
for 15 years, so you know everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably also maybe your closest.
Well, yeah, it's kind of in the middle, but
Is your, Mercer, right? Is that right? Yeah.
but it's the busiest.
We have 5 members.
Okay.
Two alternates, but we have 5. The only folks I mentioned that I heard weren't coming were Joy and Ashwin, so.
Okay.
I don't know if we want to wait another 2 minutes, see if others roll in.
Let's give it a minute. Trying to come up with this.
Nancy, I don't know if you heard that. We'll get going in about 2 minutes.
Great. Do we have a quorum?
We do. So we have 6 now with Alex. Hey, Alex.
Great, thanks.
And sadly, we have snacks in the room. Wish you guys were here with us. Try and do that some more next year.
Have to figure out a way to feed them
Uh-huh.
virtually.
Nancy, we could drop stuff off. But assuming she's not in.
Yeah, I'll-
Hawaii. Alex would be.
Is everybody staying?
Hi, Praj, do you want to test your microphone? Just make sure we can hear you.
But you- Yeah.
You're muted.
Don't even have to leave the property.
All right, Nancy, I think, or not Nancy, Stacy. you Ready with recording? Great. Welcome to the December 13th meeting of the Environmental Board. I'm Jamie Finch and I'll be your chair tonight. Due to the hybrid nature of this meeting, we will have members attending in person and by computer or phone. For those attending remotely, please mute yourself when you're not speaking and raise your hand. And we will do our best to track that. If we don't see you, just hop right in. As always, please, if you're in person, flip your name tag over if you would like to speak. We are going to be taking action today, so that's something we may want to do a little. We may want to do a little bit of a refresher on some of that stuff. We have that, so that's something we will cover before we get into that section. I think that might be the. We will have some other conversations today that we may want to summarize at the end of the topic. So I think with that, Stacy, if you want to take us through attendance.
Okay, great. Tom Anderson.
Here.
This is time for refreshments.
Yeah. Nancy Davidson.
Here.
Jamie Finch.
Here.
Raj Gopandi.
Here.
Joy Lewis has an excused absence. Ashwin Kanan has an excused absence. Ashwin Manoharan. Don McWilliams. Ann Newcomb.
Here.
Janet Wall.
Here.
Dixie Bear.
Here.
And Alex Lee Tigner. And we are missing 2 regular members. So if Janet and Dixie, if you all could participate in the vote, and then we can rock, paper, scissors when if Don shows up first to see who will participate in the vote.
All right, thank you, Stacy. Are there any comments on the minutes from the November 8th meeting? Hearing none, those are approved by unanimous consent. Up next, we have, do we have any members of the public?
All right, no, we received no written comments and we have no members of the public online or in the room.
Okay, well, then we will get right into our agenda items. The first one being natural environment checklist.
Sorry, I'm gonna try a different format. If you want, you could
Okay.
just introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be back. I'm Christian Getz. I'm the planning manager, the current planning manager over in CPD. And I am here to chat about the National Environment Checklist and monitoring and tracking. So what I want to do tonight is provide you an update and then make sure we get final input from the board on what we hope to track, what we can, what's realistic in tracking. It does sound like this has been kind of a request from the board for a number of years. And so we want to make sure that we are being responsive to that and plugging ahead and gathering that information. Go ahead, a couple slides there. So direction we're looking for. We just want to make sure we get final input from the board on what we've given you, and we can add that in. And we're right into kind of my short list of items. So background from my understanding, and I know most of you here know a little bit more about this than I do. The checklist, the natural environment checklist, started as part of the neighborhood meeting process where staff would fill that out with the information from the applicant. We've updated Title 18. That changed it from a neighborhood meeting to the pre-application community meeting. A long acronym there. And so we are continuing to process that through that new format. That piece there is what we want to make sure we're capturing the information from the board and then tracking for the purposes of maintaining kind of an adaptive management feedback loop, which I'll get into a little bit in the next couple slides. So yeah, we updated Title 18. We are going to begin reviewing and monitoring. There's going to be a huge change in kind of what can happen. Namely, Title 18 changed to remove buffer reductions. So there may be some trickling through from time past that were vested to the old code. But from now on, we're utilizing the new code and we're going through that implementation. And if we find things that give us question or give us pause, we put them on our regular update list, which grows by the day of little fixes, bigger fixes. Real quick, the feedback loop that I talked about a little bit. So Department of Commerce, they put out an adaptive management handbook, a guidebook for critical areas that was meant to provide this very straightforward method for viewing, measuring, recycling, going back through. Are the codes responsive? Are they doing what policymakers were intending to happen? I was part of a tiny piece of this related to shoreline tracking and worked with Commerce on from what I was doing at my time with the city of Kirkland before, gathering data and building that information out, starting with a really small spreadsheet of 1 or 2 items, and then it grew to a list of hundreds of projects and finally had a lot of good inputs. So the benefit of this system is to constantly go through that feedback loop. This group is one of those steps along the way, is to make sure when we have the data that we can start to report out and say, here's how much mitigation is happening in square footages, in planting types, in removal of impervious surfaces in a buffer. Here's what we're seeing. And then this group discusses, is that what we intended the codes to be doing? Do we want more? What are we seeing with the results of the code? And then that can help influence the future policies and regulations, especially with more and more information. So next slide. So the preliminary information that we get, I'm going to run through preliminary information final and then a summary review. And I'll pull up the spreadsheet, because what I did was I just took the information from that and inserted it into the presentation on the slides. But kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about, how staff would track that information. So I'll go over to the next slide. the preliminary information is just that. It is at the very early stage of a project. So this is before they come in for permit. It's the pre-application community meeting. They're giving us what they know at the time. They could have a wetland report, a stream report done. It could be in peer review, but it also couldn't be. So it really depends on how early the applicant are, how their steps are formulating. The preference, the code intent is that they do this very early on before they've done anything. They're pulling information from neighbors through community input, from having the meeting, from meeting with staff to make sure that they aren't identifying any issues down the line. So this is very subject to change. And you'll see in the example, I'll pull up the spreadsheet in a bit, of what the project started at and then what it finished with as far as scale, location of improvements. So the final information, so the next piece is that when the project is built out. So these are the as-built plans. These are the inspections that occur with staff, with biologists if needed, that will formulate and develop the final install to make sure it aligns with what was required, and then document that in this tracking sheet. And then the final piece is to take that information and just evaluate. So figure out what the preliminary project versus the final build, how did it go through the process, look at developing the overall tracking so we can have some qualitative data to utilize, and then bring it back annually with this group as well as others as we go through updates. It'll help us with our best available science studies that'll have to happen with any critical area code update, and really be useful. I think I might try to share that spreadsheet real quick just to kind of walk through it. And forgive the size of the font. I'll zoom in and out, and I'll try not to make anyone dizzy. Let's see here. So really, so yeah, I wanted to give you a scale of it. So it's pulling across the top all of the bits and pieces, and I'll from the pre-application community meeting, natural environment checklist. So it is gathering the project information, the critical area information. What is the critical area that we're talking about? Asking questions like, what's the kind of the condition of the wetland or wetland buffer at the time? Is it fully invasive? Is it covered in fully with invasives? Is it high functioning? If they have a report, that's great, because that can give us a lot of good detail. We can then again measure that at the end. If it's gone from a highly encumbered with ivy and blackberries to a newly vegetated wetland plants. That's what we want to see. Just kind of running across here. Information. All this is just right off of the checklist. Some of the things that aren't, we get into in a couple cells here. Getting into some more specifics on tree information, what's on site, impervious, current impervious versus proposed. So this helps us the regulation side of things to see, okay, they were proposing a development of X square feet. They ended up building smaller, larger. What went into that change? Are the codes working to support or guide development, or really way off? And what was that change? And then just some simple things that we can pull from whatever they may have proposed. Is it a 10-story building, a 7-story building? And just input that here to get a sense of what they thought they could build and then what they ended up building. And then from all of this, we can start to evaluate, were they not considering the buffer? Were they not considering the environmental factors for view preservation or buffer setbacks? So they had to shrink the building footprint. So this example, the top bar, this is from the Milano project. So these are the numbers that they had proposed at their original neighborhood meeting. So things like they wanted to reduce the buffer by 25%. They wanted to install 30,367 square feet of new impervious surface. It was 104 units. And then in the final completed one, and this is final with an asterisk because they haven't built it yet, but I took what was from their final presentation to Development Commission last week. So what they ended up doing was they decreased it to 65 units instead of 104. They reduced their parking. They reduced the proposed buffer reduction from 25 down to 17.8% for the stream and 15% for the wetland. And a lot of this came out through just where the location was in the review process. So these data points we would enter in as a project is completed. All of it's just pulled from the plan set. So it's just what we have in front of us from their wetland report, from their final survey information, as-built information on square footages. And then as time goes by, we'd have these add up to something useful to extrapolate results. So this just continues on to look at those. And then the final summary sheet looks at some comparisons and looks at what they propose, what they actually built, to give us part of that. I built one of these for shoreline improvements, and that started with a couple projects and it ended up with a couple hundred. One tree planted in the shoreline riparian area became 2, became 10, became 100. And it became acres, a couple acres, 5 acres on private property of riparian area revegetation, back of a bulkhead or bulkhead removal. So those are just incremental pieces. We could see something's working. Do we call it a success? Do we call, what level of a success do we call it? That's it's like this to chat about. So I want to make sure that we're pulling the information. We're pulling the information from the permit materials that could be useful for future discussions, from the natural environment checklist, as well as from the plan set. I mean, the plan sets have gobs and gobs of info that we can add into this, down to the number of shrubs, the type of plantings. And because they come in, a year, it's not a huge heavy lift. It's just right in front of us as part of the last step of review and then the last step of the inspection process and wrap up.
Christian, do you mind that you sent me this table in email, which was really helpful, and if you're already going to get to it, but like the projects that, what makes it to this level versus
Sure. So yeah, so the projects that would hit that level, they are anything that's a level 2 and it has critical areas on the property. And then it would be, stop sharing. So there's a long list of those. Then within level 3, it would be preliminary plats. And so it's out of 18204, that fund table, any level 3 that has critical areas on the property, it's always required for preliminary plats. Then anything that's a level 4. Level 4 would be a building 10,000 square feet or greater. It would be a master site plan major. a former master site plan or a site development permit major modification that doesn't meet the minor thresholds. And level 2 permits, those include everything from, so it's a long laundry list. Shoreline, all the shoreline permits, obviously they already are in a critical area, but a short plat, if a short plat had critical areas on the property, then they would be required to complete the natural environment checklist and go through the pre-application community meeting. If there were wetlands offsite that threw buffers on them, they're still there, they're still going to be accommodated, but they don't trip that threshold for going through that meeting. There's still things we want to track. So those are still items that can be placed on that checklist to make sure that they are part of the final summary for completion, because there could be wetland plantings that happen on that one short plot site, even if there's not a wetland on the property.
Is there for a single family home that has critical areas, is that level 2 or level 1?
If it's single family rebuild, they're not expanding towards the buffer, they're observing the buffer, they're not going to go anywhere near that, then they would not be subject to the checklist. They could observe that, keep it as it is,
Mhm.
and just do their project. If they have to do, well, they already have reasonable use, so that would be hard to propose.
Mhm.
But if it's a non-conforming site and they're remodeling under the thresholds of the non-conformance section, then yes, it would kick it up to a level 2.
Or if it was new development.
Or yes, or new development.
Nancy, please go ahead. Oh, you're still muted.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I have 4 major points that I'd like to go over with Christian. And so I just want the committee to bear with me as we have this conversation. The first one is, well, let me do an overall perspective. I think when we asked for this spreadsheet and tracking, we were trying to keep track of how we're doing in the environment. I mean, we're an environmental board. Our goal is really to keep track of how many trees are getting cut down that are of a certain size, how many wetlands are being impacted, and how they're being, let's say, how new ones are being planted, whatever the case may be. So my first concern is by just doing the stuff that is doing a pre-application meeting, we're missing things like, let's say the troll impacted a major, I mean, I know that's later on the agenda, but let's say it was impacting a major wetland, its location, and it was put in under an art installation, nothing that required a pre-application meeting. And any art could go into a wetland. So I'm concerned that we're missing some of these. And I'll give you more examples. That's why I said I have a few points. The new high school. The 2 urban villages that are proposed, one at the gravel pit, the second one in the Raleigh properties. Now, those are all signed agreements, but clearly each of those projects will impact critical areas. And we need to have a way to track that. So I think what my goal was, and I thought it was the committee's goal, was to have a report card that we could put out every year of here's how we've done over the last year in terms of our impacts to the environment. And by just doing the stuff that has a pre-application meeting, we may be missing some of the others. Clearly the big ones like the urban village or the ones that have development agreements, we're going to miss those. But I just think we need to be able to track those. I don't know if Christian, you have any comment on that before I move on to the next piece of this.
I think those are totally trackable. Those along with voluntary restoration projects that the state does, the city does. Those are things that we want to identify what's happening on within the jurisdictional boundaries. What are the pluses and minuses? Hopefully only pluses, but what are the things that are happening in the city? So the checklist was just a kind of a starting point to say here's a baseline. We can compare the final product And yes, we can gather that same information from final as-built plans, final plans, and final sticks in the ground.
Great. That answers point one that I had on this. Now I'll move on to point two. I looked at the table. I had not seen the table that you just presented on screen, which was hard to see. Screens aren't big enough at home. But anyway, it would be great if I think you're tracking planned what they put in their application and then actual of what they actually do at the end of the day in terms of impacts to sensitive areas. Is that accurate?
Yes, planned, and then what is installed, yes, and what's approved is the minimum, and then what is installed and reviewed by staff or by a consultant if necessary, then we're verifying what's in the ground, right?
Okay, so I have another suggestion for your table that you're reporting out in. So the suggestion I'd have for you is that, you have planned and actual. But actual would be great to say we started this in 2023. Let's just say that. And this is what happened in 2023. And then we go to 2024. So we also have a cumulative. So we kind of see how we're doing every year. So at some point we could plot, kind of how we're doing on wetlands. This year we impacted, 100 acres of wetlands. I know that's not going to happen, or we planted 500 trees. Last year we only did 20. But I think what I'm trying to say is it would be great to see how we're doing on an annual basis, not just a cumulative basis starting in 2023. Am I communicating that effectively to you, Christian?
So you're saying you're looking for anything completed and installed within a calendar year is what we would look at, whether, even if it was approved in years past, really just the measurement is when is it installed? The year that it's installed.
So we'd have planned and then we'd actually have actual and then a cumulative actual. So that you're actually saying, since we started this in 2023, if that's the year we started, this is how much, when the code was approved, this is what what we've learned, and this is what we've done. That's just a suggestion for consideration by the administration. Then I'm going to move to my next point. And this is my last one. You're collecting some great information and you're looking at these plans. And this committee is charged with implementing we're supposed to be tracking climate change and actions that support our climate action plan. And a lot of these will have that. So if we could request perhaps some additions to your table, which is how many EV stations were installed as part of this. I mean, some of them will have none. Some will, you have some developments that will. How many, solar panels or how much energy was installed in solar panels or other things that we're trying to track in the climate action plan. Because you see this day in and day out, and it probably is pretty easy to track versus trying to ask the sustainability group to try and track it, or maybe that's their job. But I'm just saying that there's another piece of information that would be valuable from an environmental standpoint that would help here. And I'm sure that Stacy and the sustainability group can identify what measures would help in the climate action plan that are going in new installations. That's just my feedback and suggestions.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Christian, were there more parts of your presentation you wanted to go through, or?
No, that was pretty much it. So I just wanted to make sure that if there are other fields like EV stations, solar panel installs, as we go through the permitting process, CPD, we can add those as items, even if they're not related. If they are associated with one of the larger projects, then great. It's part of the final package. And the larger ones likely will have those. I mean, it's even adding a LEED certification. So the larger buildings have to be LEED certified. So that would be something that we could look at and track how many units or how many buildings are completed. So.
Alex, go ahead.
Yeah,
and on the topic of
Oh.
additional, is my microphone not working very well?
Yeah.
Okay, give me 1 second and I'll plug my headphones in. It wasn't working very well earlier either. Sorry about that. On the topic of adding additional fields, you mentioned that we could do like plant type, maybe even species. I would personally like to see if we're putting more native species in versus like ornamentals, that type of thing. And I don't know if that's really calculated in the canopy density or just the number of trees planted. And I do appreciate this spreadsheet. I like spreadsheets. This one looks really nice. It's complicated looking. So I appreciate the attention to detail and everything that's going in there. And I know we're asking for like a lot of additional things to go in there. But I really appreciate that we have a format that we can utilize to capture this data. It's really important data for us.
Sure, yeah. And one thing about spreadsheets, the permit systems, they come and go. Jurisdictions replace, update, and sometimes those replacements and updates don't talk well with former systems, but spreadsheets seem to be here to stay. So very easily manipulated and just get the inputs in there, and we can work with that in the future.
Should I have one other question and then I have a couple comments? Is Kara considered a critical area that, like, if the project is within like the critical or recharge area, that would be subject to a neighborhood checklist?
Yeah, so it is listed within the definitions under whether it's sensitive area or critical area, and it doesn't differentiate level 1 through level 4. There's been discussion on, did we mean for that to happen? Did we mean for it to be level 1 and 2? I think level 1 and 2 are the higher graded ones, and 3 and 4 were not. We don't believe it's part of the state's kind of umbrella of critical areas. And we're seeking that information from them because we want to know for House Bill 1110, is the entire city off limits for CARA, or is there a specific standard, specific definition for a critical area that they?
Yeah, part of the reason it seems like impervious surface on anything that's over CARA would be of interest. So I'm just curious, like, I similarly, I'm trying to, and I know this is not an easy question of how we turn data on projects into like insight into policy. But I do think there's both like surface area, like, are we covering the right things? And then are we measuring the right things and where we're covering? And so I do wonder, like, things like impervious surface is important in a lot of it. It's not just in next to a wetland that impervious surface matters. So I do wonder if there's some measures that we should be trying to pull from a broader data set, even if it's not impacting another critical area, or how we're going to, or where we're going to put that critical area line. The other thing that comes to mind is Title 18 update as it relates to tree canopy. So we're going to have people have a bunch of options on what they can do when they're redeveloping or when they're developing new sites, like keep trees, replace trees, do stuff offsite. Like, some of those decisions, I think if we're not tracking how people, even if it's not a critical area, how they're using that, then we will have missed a really big opportunity to just like learn and figure out, do we have this set up correctly to achieve our goals? I think one thing that cuts across both climate and natural environment is that the tree canopy goals. So that's another thing. Just wondering if there is a way for us to get insight into some of these key items. And I think another piece that, like, actually as probably the most valuable conversation I remember in Title 18, and I can't remember the woman's name, but she was a permit reviewer, and she was at one of our meetings, and she was like, yeah, so this is what the codes, this is how people are actually using it. Like, because I think what we're looking at in this table is we're looking at like outcomes. We don't actually know how this is being made. And so I think as much as we're going to want to track data, like, I think that's really important. But the piece that I think we may be missing because we don't have another kind of feedback loop is like, what are the human beings on staff seeing, and what are the problems that, or kind of uses of the code that people are seeing? And so, I don't know how that comes to life, but that felt in a lot of ways more about like, they could cut through a bunch of data. They do that for their job, is like figuring out how people are using code, making sure they're compliant. So I do wonder if there's some other form of more qualitative feedback that could be helpful, just as we think about our work plan for the year. Are there topics that we should be talking about that people on your staff are seeing as potential issues, that maybe it's something in new Title 18 code that maybe isn't being used in the way that they thought it would be, or that maybe we should be revisiting. So I think similarly, our conversation later in this meeting is going to be about how the board thinks about priorities, how we think about our work plan. And there are certain things that I think are like particularly timely. I've mentioned a couple, like I think tree canopy is one of the big changes in Title 18, where people have choices. And so I do wonder if there is some way of, and I don't know how to do this without it being onerous on your end, but like, I think there's going to be certain policy focus areas in any given year that we might be looking at. And so it would be nice to be able to get insight into, like, for example, maybe it's not permanent that we're measuring tree canopy for all projects, but like maybe there's certain priority areas that we do want to get in, like we're trying to make a decision 2 years down the road. And I think that kind of needs to come from the board on identifying what those priorities are. But that feels like another area that, like, there's opportunity for us, and I think this dovetails into the conversation later, for us to be asking for more specific feedback and more specific, like, areas that we're really concerned about or really want to put some focus into. Because it's great that we have all these columns. I think in reality, a lot of those columns will go unused, the majority, or they're difficult to get real insight out of. And so there may be some high potential or kind of high impact fields that we think, hey, let's keep the every year, like tracked items relatively short. And then what are our priority items that we should really be thinking about and know that we need to be capturing for a wider range of projects, so we can focus efforts on not capturing like 20, 30 details on every project, but what are the 3 things that we think matter? So I think that's something that I'd love to talk more with the board if there's interest on that. And then let's see, is there anything else? No, I think that was it. I mean, I think at the end of the day, what I'm concerned about is, like, a checklist is inherently kind of static, and how do we turn this into actionable insights into what is going on, what is going right, what is going wrong? And so, like, the question, we looked through that project detail of what happened that pre-application meeting and final. The answer I would love to ask whoever was reviewing the permits is, like, what went well on that project? Like, what do we like about this outcome? What do we not like about this outcome? Because ultimately that's what I would love our board to have insight into, is like, what's going well? How is our code being implemented? What are the weaknesses and the strengths? What do we think are like our observations, not just the data on what is happening? So yeah, I don't have a ton of really specific items. I do think one thing that I'd like to talk about later with the board is just how we think about priorities and how that might filter into this environmental, or into this neighborhood checklist. But yeah, just feel like we need to really think hard about not just tracking, but trying to find ways to gain insight into, like, policies that we are concerned about, or identifying things that we should think about.
Yeah, so coupling into some of the things Jamie is just talking about, quandary of, well, how do we evaluate the goodness of environmental impacts? How do we evaluate the goodness of our processes that brought us through those environmental impacts? And I'm wondering, well, we're not the first body to have grappled with this kind of problem. Has there been any standardization of methods of dealing with such evaluations in the industry, and by industry, I mean sustainable development, that we could learn from and benefit from? Is this something that's reached that level of maturity? Maybe it hasn't. I guess I ask it as a question. Is there such science out there that we can learn from and incorporate into our own evaluation process? Any comments on that question?
I mean, I would suggest the Commerce Guidebook on adaptive management. There's 9 or 10 online trainings that kind of walk through it, and the guidebook itself is there to help jurisdictions, decision makers on how to dive into information and what to look for, how to measure what to measure, as it's very specific by jurisdiction. So there's no one right answer, but there are. That was their intent, is to provide some guidance to cities and counties and agencies that might want to be tracking what to look for, questions to ask themselves. What are you trying to learn? And how can that be integrated into this board's work?
We did a little, well, through the rivers and streams transition to the environmental board, there was an assessment done of nearby and out of state boards and commissions, and do they address these topics and look at projects at this level? Many of them don't seem to. We did reach out to a couple of jurisdictions yesterday to see if they are doing anything like this. Bainbridge might be. I heard back from them this afternoon, so I'll follow up with them this week and see if they have any kind of tool. But so far, we haven't been able to find a board or commission that is doing this type of assessment, possibly at the staff level of the work.
Kristen, you mentioned, can't remember the acronym you used, but it was something about like when there's an active monitor, like there's an active code review or something. Forget what the term was. Oh, I guess it's when they're updating. You said when we're updating critical area ordinances, that's when we're focusing on energy, on like kind of gathering these sort of inputs. I think.
And that's the data can support the critical area study that would be done. You know, if we'd hire an outside consultant to do an assessment of what our conditions are, what our buffers are we meeting the requirements of the state? Then the on the ground, it's the actual tangible. Can you walk on it? Can you touch it? What has been built out? That has sometimes more value because it's what everyone sees versus reaches of streams that the broader may not be aware of.
Part of the reason I was asking that is I was curious what's that like. So I love the idea of adaptive management. Like what, and a lot of the reason that, like, I don't necessarily think the board needs to be the one that is tracking all that. Like, I think ultimately staff is the one that, so I'm just curious what your team's plan is. Like, obviously our checklist is one component. I think what we don't know now is like, what is staff already doing, or what is staff planning to do that would kind of fit under that adaptive management?
Yeah, the plan would be to be tracking, completed projects as they wrap up as part of the annual circle back to this group, as to re-examine the checklist, or is it capturing the questions that you want to have captured, and here are the projects that have been completed. To touch on what did we recognize from the beginning to the end of a project? We do keep track of potential code updates, so amendments that may need to happen for one reason or another. This code looks with that code. How do we clean that up? So as part of that, we could say, well, when the Milano project is actually built and built out, we'd have something to go measure, and that would be part of that year's report out of, yes, this was under the old code. Here's what was built. Here's what it looks like. Here's how the process went. Here the other, and do that for those larger projects where we are circling back on. Here are all of the ones that went through the completed the checklist, and here's the ones that are completed. Here's what they installed on the site, and here's a summary of how it went. And that might start to establish the questions of, when you see it completed, well, that's not what we were thinking, or oh, that is about what we were hoping for, or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So that's our.
So it sounds like it's a bit of a more informal, just kind of either a list or observations that your team is making as projects work through the process.
Right. And starting very broad with as much information as we can gather helps us focus that in the future. If we need to, we don't miss anything if we've been entering all of these items. Some ask, why did I want to know how many pilings were removed, like Washington? Yes, we had one, and then we had two, we had a dozen. So that's a positive, but for that 9 miles of shoreline, that was all we had control over. So some are going to have small final measurements, final or at certain check-ins. Some will have larger values.
Alex, I know you had your hand up. You still want to speak?
I think that answered my question. I was going to ask about like effectiveness monitoring of these projects, and I think you kind of got at that just now. I'm more familiar with like habitat restoration permitting and processes, and there's usually like you have to report back, typically post 1 year, post 3 year, post 5 years, potentially post 10 years after you do one of these projects on how the process is going. So that's what I was kind of wondering, like, do we have measurements in there for how tree survival, or if fish passage is still happening at a culvert replacement or things like that? Just from that very much environmental aspect of things to check in on how these projects are going. And I think you kind of answered that it would be more just observational and looking back at projects by staff. But if there's other opportunities to capture more stringent data on those projects, that would be nice.
Thank you, Alex. Raj, go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my camera is not working. Sorry about that. So I have just one question. I was trying to understand, just get a general idea of the statistics. So you said the data was obtained from two projects which have gone through the process completely, right? So I just wanted to know how many similar total projects are there which have not required to go through the process, and are there any other projects undergoing this process but have not completed yet?
Yeah, so from what I could find, there were two projects that were completed that went through the neighborhood meeting. And
Right.
did the checklist. One of them was the ISD stream bank restoration project, and the other was I think it's finally wrapping up. It's the SPAR booster pump, so public works project. Those I didn't dive into the details, but they would populate that. Other projects that were or are adjacent to critical area buffers that weren't required to go through the neighborhood meeting. We haven't tracked those. That would be a sort of a backwards review and pulling that information in, so we could pick dates to say, well, anything completed in 2023, let's pull all of that and just start to build that report with probably the critical date of projects after June 1st that were subject to the new code. If they were permitted and completed under the new code, we'd want to at least start to identify where that change in the measurement is taking place. But we can, when time allows or we're through.
No, actually, I was not, I mean, the reason I was asking it because I was just trying to figure out how stringent is the checklist, means, was it like 50 projects which are undergoing, out of which only 2 need, to go through the process, or is it 2 out of 10, or what was kind of, the proportion?
Sure, there have only been 2 completed, and there are about a dozen that went through the neighborhood checklist process from what I can tell.
Okay, thank you.
So do you have any, because obviously you've gone through this process extensively with Kirkland. What, like, if you were the board, what do you think is the thing that, like, how would you recommend we track these things, and what were your kind of learnings from?
No, I think the good additions that we can look to about EV stalls, looking at solar panels, looking at the monitoring piece. So we do monitoring. We do our 3 or 5 year monitoring on projects. So those would be, for us, they'd be valuable to recognize from an administrative side of the coin, what's our success rate? How much time are we spending? With the circle back of plantings have failed after year 3, you have to restart, or was it successful, and why was it successful? Because we had good monitoring, they had a good crew that was going out and making sure that everything was working, and they got on issues right away. And then sort of the next piece, which is maybe a little more lofty, is okay, 10 years down the road, how do those restoration sites look? Or whether they were voluntary or required. Where folks painstakingly removed blackberries or something from space. So that would be useful, because then that helps us understand, okay, is 3 year monitoring long enough? Would better success be 5 or 7 or 10? Is that feasible? So, and what's the success rate? Is it native plants versus non-native, or traditionally non-native, but they do well in the climate? They have a better success rate. What's better? And that gets a little bit more into the forestry conversation. But I think from the perspective of if it's within a critical area or it's buffer, like a stream or wetland, a steep slope, a forested hillside, those are very finite spaces that we can track any number of things, including trees removed, trees planted. Forestry program of replanting, where's that happening? What's the canopy percentage? That's aerial imagery, and Dan hits to kind of build that up every 5 years or so to know what our canopy's doing, where we're seeing growth, where we're seeing decline, and then we can start to build that. I'd say broader, diverge as much as possible and gather as much that we have at the time. It's less time consuming that way to just either ignore data in the future and then stop tracking it to know it doesn't do us any good, or then to have to go back and start to gather.
And do you feel like right now we are broad enough in what we're tracking, or are there things that you think we should be looking at? It sounds like one thing that I haven't heard before, which I think is a really interesting idea, is that there's some, like, we're stopping measurement. This checklist stops at the end of the project being completed, but there's actually like years that, like, there's down the road impacts that we won't know at the point even when the project's done. What's happened to the trees? What's happened to the buffer area?
And our inspector looks at that. So it's part of the permitting is part of the process for us to go and verify and either re-up their planting and their security, or released that security because it was successful. So that information would be useful as whether it's another tab on the spreadsheet, the final info years out. Just making sure we get it locked into our step-by-step.
Any other comments from the board? Well, I may want to just summarize. I'm going to attempt to summarize that a little bit. And Christian, if you already feel like you have a summary, I'll save my breath. But would that be helpful to try to summarize up what?
I think I've got it.
You think you got it? Okay.
What it sounds like the board would like to see, and staffs, they're the ones that will recognize we should start tracking this as well.
Mhm.
So they're the ones that are going to be doing it, and we'll add things as needed, and with the regular checkbacks with the group here, we'll, I think, identify what might be needed. If it's a line item that somehow we missed, it's not that you can go back and find that data.
Yeah, no, I think you guys are the ones that are in this every day, every week. And while this is a tool that's made for the environmental board, hopefully it's something that it can become useful to staff over time.
Yes, selfishly, it will help us justify, the need for buffer standards, the benefit of planting installations, the reason why native plants are selected, certain plants are selected for wetlands.
Yeah, and I think also something to share with the public potentially of like measuring impacts, things that can be on the website or some stuff that. Awesome. Well, appreciate it. Sounds like we're at the end of this topic, but appreciate you sharing and yeah, I think we'll be interested to see where this checklist continues to evolve. So appreciate everyone's comments.
Yeah, I think Christian will be back or someone from staff will be back in August and we'll present the updated table results, annual, cumulative, and then maybe some kind of report to accompany that. So
yeah,
we'll get to look at some results at our next discussion.
Great. I think with that, then we move on to our next item, which is the annual report and self-analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christian.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so switching topics. Tonight we are really looking for 3 items from the board. The first is we're going to do a reflection on the self-analysis and then identify next steps to talk how we're going to have discussions around board priorities. And then the third item is we will be looking for approval from the board tonight on the annual report. So tonight we'll just be talking through the annual report results, looking at the self-analysis results, having some discussions, and then moving into that approval. As a reminder, the board report is required for submission annually to City Council by December 31st. This year, we followed the same structure as has been used since the board was founded, and discussed how our work aligned with our roles and responsibilities, what content we covered through our board meetings this year, any recommendations that were made to other boards, commissions, or council, and then also it is intended to summarize the self-analysis. Just in looking at the report too, I hope folks appreciated how much you had covered this year. And for me, looking back at it, just to think we were starting off 2023 with the Title 18 review. It seems like a long time ago, but that was quite a bit of build up to that work. So tonight we're looking for any revisions to the board report. We are going to take a vote at the end of this presentation on approval to send it to council. We will be moving into a discussion on the self-analysis because felt that was important to cover before we do the formal vote. But at this time, I did want to see if there are any revisions that folks have to the report before it goes to council.
Stacey, are we going to revisit, because this question seems,
We can revisit it too, yeah. The report really just, it cut and pasted in the results of the self-analysis, but yes, we can revisit at the end. I'd like to do that. We can come back to this before the final. So I'll just move into the results of the self-analysis. Before jumping into 2023, I did want to just reflect a little bit on the 2022 self-analysis and just identified the feedback we received then, where we've made progress and where we haven't made some progress. In 2022, we heard a lot about from the board members about incorporating in a feedback loop with staff. So understanding how your comments, your recommendations were taken and incorporated. We have created a feedback loop with staff that's provided to them prior to coming to the board, and that the expectation is that they will circle back with the board and how the input is taken. In 2022, the board identified a number of topics that they wanted to cover over the next year. We were able to touch on a lot of those. Some we did not cover due to delays in planning timelines, or there were specific projects that staff just weren't able to advance because of lack of funds. There was a request from the board to improve the framing of all topics under the climate action plan. I think that's something we're still working on improving and something that we'll really work on in 2024. And then the last thing I just wanted to highlight is there was a request to change the requirements for in-person attendance. We worked with the clerk's office and made a more flexible policy for virtual attendance. So we were able to address quite a bit of the feedback that we received a year ago. Definitely some areas that we're still working on, cleaning up that feedback loop and framing content under the ICAP. So for 2023, just a quick snapshot, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. We had about 60% participation. So if you were one of the ones that weren't able to take that survey, we hope that you'll share more of your thoughts tonight. We had general consensus from those that did take it that presenting staff really listened to the board and were incorporating their feedback. General consensus that the board functions well. We did hear from a number of groups that they want to dive in deeper to topics. They want to set priorities, take some leadership, and then they also want to hear back from the elected officials and administration about how the board can really influence decisions that are being made. I'll go into each of those just a little bit more. So in terms of are we meeting our objectives, the board members scored pretty well that you all are meeting the objectives as laid out in the code, but that we wanted to have more of an impact in terms of setting priorities and taking leadership on topics. Folks felt that there's too much material at the meetings and that we're often having to be rushed through those topics. In terms of general satisfaction with the board, generally, the board members generally feel that the content presented is a good mix of topics, good quality presentations from staff. But again, they commented that they wanted to dive deeper and have a more limited set of topics at each meeting. That theme was reiterated under the topics and priorities. Board members also expressed interest in diving a little bit deeper in terms of transportation, policy and planning, building electrification, building code. Really want to dive deep into some of these most impactful planning and project themes. There was also interest in engaging more in topics around the forest management plan, ecosystem and habitat related projects. For staff support, board generally felt that that the board was well supported, really appreciated the staff and consultant presentations, but wanted to work on making sure we weren't overloading the agenda and that meetings weren't running over. The board was a little bit mixed in terms of whether they felt like they were having an impact and whether the recommendations were really taken into account. The scores range from everywhere a 3 to a 10, which was the highest score. We had an average score of about a 7. And really, the board really does want to feel that impact that they're having in terms of providing their feedback. Board members did feel like they were able to move the needle and have real influence on some of the big topics we covered last year, like Title 18, comp plan, the capital improvement plan, and climate action plan. And then the last section of the survey around improvements, board members recognize that we have a very broad scope, but really do want to take those opportunities to set priorities and do that in partnership with the administration and council. And again, reiterated that interest in diving deeper into topics and taking more time on that. So that's a very quick summary of the self-analysis results. What I wanted to do with Jamie now is just open it up for any reflections on that feedback. For those that did or did not take the survey, any other feedback that you have, and just interested especially around that, the item that was expressed multiple times about diving deeper into less topics. Would just love to hear any reflection on that. Before we move into discussion, I don't know, Jamie, anything else that you wanted to that jumped out at the survey from you?
Nothing. I'll certainly have some thoughts once we get into the conversation, but I don't think anything that I need to start with. I think the only other area that I know, which I think is an interesting idea that I'd be curious of people's feedback, is the idea of, and I don't know if there's the idea of some sort of retreat or something. Is that?
Yeah, we'll go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted first, to hear really those reflections, thoughts, or any other comments, especially if you weren't able to take it, and then we can talk about some of those next steps and ideas that came in the survey regarding setting priorities.
Cool. Yeah. So if anyone has comments on this, jump in.
I'm not sure if this is what we're going to talk about later or now, but I had a little bit of I did not finish mine because I was like, I really feel like I'm still very new. And so I do think it shows up maybe somewhere else in here. But I feel like I've been on other boards where I feel like this always seems to happen when you first get on a board. It like takes a year to really wrap your head around everything. And I find it frustrating for me because I want to contribute and I feel like I'm not a contributing member because and I know I recognize that we talked about big things this year that are like they're big topics, but walking into it with the the understanding that like you're just going to read the memo and then you'll come to the meeting and it's it takes a couple hours of your time every month. And I'm like, well, actually, probably if I understood everything we were talking about, that's true. But the catch-up piece to be able to contribute is, I think, for me, it would be more than just reading the memo. I really have to go backwards and like look at the history and to add meaningful comments. I could make comments, but you guys might be like, we already talked about that. So again, I think it's in here later, but I do think it would be important, even if it's, and I don't know how that fits with the rules of how we meet, but I do think it would be valuable, especially if we're talking about adding board members, to have some sort of way that we're getting people up to speed. Otherwise, I'm going to be like trying, but it's going to be 6 more months before I feel like I have things like that means something, if that makes sense. So, so it was a little tricky for me I felt to fill out the report because I would go like half of it. I'm like, yeah, I can answer it. And then it wouldn't let me like skip a question too. So I was like, well, I don't want to just write like, I have nothing to say. I don't know. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So just a thought.
Do you have any, I think what your point about how hard it is, like especially the first years, is really good. Do you have any things that you think would have helped you or anyone else that is new, Alex or Projects. Yeah, if there's any ideas that I'm curious on, any ideas that any of the newer members or any of the not as new members have on how that kind of learning curve, how we could help people kind of get up that learning curve faster.
I guess I can finish my thought. I think partially what I find sometimes when I'm reading the memos, like they like, okay, I think I get it, but then when I'm here, I get it so much more. And then I think like, oh, now I can actually, you know, like maybe not tonight, but like at the next one, I'd be like, okay, I think I get it, right? But then we don't talk about it again. We're done with that topic. So I know in other boards I've been on, we've talked about like that first kind of like it's a, I don't know, prep. You know, where like if we know that we are going to be talking about, you know, here you are, this is where you are, this is where you're entering the stream. We know what we're talking about for the next 6 months because there's an agenda. And here's what we talked about before you got here. And here's how that relates to this. It's that would help because then I think I didn't know. I mean, I feel like I know a lot of stuff because my whole world is sustainability, but my world is not tree canopies and streams. Like that's not the world I'm in. You want to talk about operations and buildings, like I can jump in, but in business, I can jump in, but you know, and some of this other stuff, it's just not really, it's not my, so I have to, you know, navigate getting there. So maybe it's just simply, I don't think it would take a lot of time, but like, what is Title 18? Like, there's a lot of words we throw around in here that I'm like, I'm going to have to look that up later because I don't know what that means, you know? And so then I'm over here going, I want to say something that like, I don't even know what this 10 things for. I know. So that could be a little bit of a barrier, I think, maybe as people, maybe it's just me, but because I guess we might also be bringing on board members that have a lot more experience. So in fields where they're very comfortable with these topics, but I think if we're trying to get why with people, maybe it's just about, you know, a little orientation.
Yeah, more in-depth orientation.
Yeah.
Raj, and then we'll go to Nancy.
Yeah. Hi, Jamie, and thanks. So I do have a little bit of input on that because I haven't been here for a year either. I think my first meeting was in May. So I do understand, you know, sometimes you don't necessarily know everything. The topics are new, you are not aware of it, as well as sometimes the same report comes to the board or has come to the board like third time in a row when I'm seeing it for the first time. So, you know, there is a lot of more complicated things happening in that report or the conversation because the basics are all covered already in the previous two meetings. So a couple of things which helped me was, a part was, you know, just understanding the fact that I may or may not be an expert or I may not have enough information of all these topics. And that's what really the beauty of the environmental board is. You need, you know, board members from various disciplines. So there will be, you know, like valuable input from all sectors. So that was one. But the other thing which really helped me was, I really like the idea. A lot of times, Stacy or whoever, you know, or other presenters, even outside presenters, they will say, if you have any input, please send it to Stacy later and, you know, this week later, and, you know, we will take it from there. So I have gone home and looked at the report if I had not looked at it or if I didn't understand something. And sometimes I have provided input and sometimes I have not because nothing really came out of it. You know, valuable input I could provide. So those couple of things I think helped, but I do understand that feeling, but I think it's a part of the process. So it didn't bother me as much. And one thing I wanted to add, Stacy, was, and I didn't get a chance to add anywhere in the, you know, the survey was, I really like the field trips. Unfortunately, I missed because I was sick or there were some other issues, but I really like the idea of the field trips, which the, you know, board arranges. I think that's great. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Nancy, go ahead.
I think having been one of the original people that helped when this board kind of got started, I think the feedback about how far we've come and how much we acknowledge all of us that started this board. I mean, we all didn't know what we were doing when we started and then have evolved. But it's very hard. I think even next year when there's new board members that come on, the same thing's going to happen. In May, there will be a new set of board members because some of us are coming off the board that will come to fruition. But I think that even bears more, we need to decide what's important to us. I mean, if you look at the number of topics we covered in 2023, there's a lot of them, and they cover all kinds of different issues. And I think if I think back to 2022, the same thing happened. We were doing a lot of different things. So if we can get people up to speed on our core priorities and bring the other things in along the way, and I'm not sure what our core priorities are. I suspect we all have a different priority, but I think it would be an interesting conversation to hear. And we stay focused on what's important to us instead of letting the administration just kind of keep sending us different things all the time. I really appreciated the memos that were attached to this agenda, so we didn't have to spend a lot of time on them. But if there's things they want us to see, we can always provide input. But I think it's important for us to stay focused. And I did not feel like in 2023 we did a very good job of that. And that's not a reflection on the committee, Stacy, or anyone else. I just think we just went all over the place and saw a lot of different topics that seemed to just came to us. That's my feedback.
Thank you, Nancy. One other thought on the thing that Dixie brought up. I know I had the benefit when I was starting, while the board was new, Nancy was not new to how city government works, how a lot of these things work. And I was lucky enough to be her vice chair. So I got like kind of her input and her kind of thought, how she thought about things. And so I do think agree, it's not easy to get up to speed, but if there's someone that you see that you think, oh, they kind of have it, and I would reach out. That's something that I think other board members would be happy to support. And Nancy was always so helpful with me and happy to help me. So that would be one other thing is, I think it is, like Raj said, a natural process. Like you weren't here for year one when we were all new, and it was a bunch of newbies. But yeah, that would be one other suggestion is if there's certain things. I mean, Title 18 is a big topic, and you might be able to get a downloaded 30 minutes over coffee from someone about that and what's important, or what they think is important, at least. That might help cut out 6 months of kind of osmosis through meetings.
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing, oh, Stacey, do you have something you want to add?
I was just gonna say, as that was making, besides a kind of deeper orientation, maybe some kind of matching of new members with older members that are willing to take that extra time to talk through things or meet up.
The other thing I really agree with Nancy on, I felt like this year in particular, I was saying this to Stacy and Dawn when we had our check-in, that like previous 2 years, we had Title 18 and we had ICAP as like kind of our North Stars. Like we were focused on big topics close to our hearts that I think we had kind of our own priorities were sort of built into the year, but this was the first year that I don't, like Title 18 was kind of done, comp plan is kind of something different, that we didn't really have it built in. And I really do think that it's important that we talk about what the board thinks is important, what do we think are priorities, and there's always going to be things that need to come through the board, and staff will need to bring different topics that might not fall within that category. But I think we as a group, we should be clear, and I think it would help Stacy and myself, whoever is the chair, to know what the board really cares about, so we can, one, make sure that the work plan reflects that, and two, on agendas where we have things we really care about and other things we might not care about, make sure that we're spending the appropriate amount of time, and might need to be a little more kind of structured in how we do that, so we make sure that we spend time on stuff the board really cares about. Not to say that we're going to shirk our responsibilities, but I think that knowledge would really help me and Stacy and probably staff also know what to present. Nancy, go ahead.
Just a small comment to add to that if we have those priorities identified, it will be easier for new members who might come to the board or to recruit new members. Just a thought. There we go.
And go ahead.
So Dixie, I think you mentioned that sometimes you think of a question or a comment, but you don't want to say it because somebody might have already asked it or said it in a previous meeting. I'm just wondering if we would all agree that it's okay to ask the same question more than once and make the same comment more than once. Does everybody agree on that? Okay. So I would say if you have a question or a comment, just do it. Don't worry if it's already been said. It'll remind us.
I think the other thing we could think about is like, and I guess we might need to talk to the clerks, but like when we do the review of the minutes, like I think the minutes are supposed to capture what we said in the previous meeting, but maybe there's some other time that like if Dixie, you had an epiphany while we were gone or someone else, like if that's kind of a pattern that we make sure that that gets heard. It's one thing to email it out, but is there another way to like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this would look like, but some way to make sure that just if you didn't have, just because you didn't have it during the meeting, the idea or whatever comment that you want to share, that's something that the board hears. So yeah, don't know what that is, but
Maybe emailing it would be.
yeah, that would be a step. That would be the easy step. There might be no way.
Or bring to the next meeting.
Yeah.
if it's captured. The staff could do that and say, here are the comments we received since the last meeting. All right, any other reflections on the self-analysis? We're then gonna move into kind of next steps, or how do we move forward with a discussion around priorities?
The only other thing, and I actually don't think I said this in my comments. Like, just like I don't think we know what the board's priorities are, I also don't think we know what like the public at large's priorities are as it relates to the environment. And so again, don't know. I mean, is it like a workshop near the end of the year? Is there some way that, because we don't get people coming to our meetings, which is understandable Wednesday nights at 6:30 or not, people aren't standing in line to get in here at that time. But is there some way to get more public feedback on what's going well? I mean, I think this could be applied to ICAP level. This could be applied to like broader level, but I think there's ways that either the board or sustainability team, you guys are already doing a lot, but like there's ways that we could start to get a pulse on what people in the city really care about.
All right, well, if you have other thoughts after tonight or reflections, definitely send those along. What we were gonna talk about was just kind of next steps. We'll move into a discussion around kind of what we might pull out of that self-analysis. But we will be sharing all this information with the council, including Jamie and Dawn and other members of the board are invited to join a council meeting in February. And then one item we will be moving forward with in early 2024 is our work plan, and we'll talk about that in a little bit in terms of how that's developed. We did provide in the packet a draft work plan. The reason I wanted to provide that, even though we're not discussing our work plan tonight, is just so you have a sense as we go into these future discussions about what staff see as priorities for the board, what they are intending to bring to the board. We can throw that out and start from scratch when we get into a discussion around our priorities, but at least for you to have that as kind of a resource as we do move into those discussions. So moving forward, there were some great ideas in the self-analysis around priority setting, taking some leadership, diving deeper into a more limited set of topics, and better engagement from city council and city administration. So I wanted to talk through a couple different ideas and then also invite board members to provide other ideas. So one comment from a board member talked about a board retreat. thinking through this a little bit more, this could be an evening meeting. There, we can use it, do kind of more of a work planning meeting. So thinking, moving around, flip charts, sticky notes, dot voting, something that's a little more interactive. I would need to work with the clerks on how that is structured in terms of a public meeting. But something that would be a little more interactive. We could even invite the mayor, members of the council, or heads of certain departments to join. We could talk about what is our long-term intended impact? What do we want to accomplish over the next year? Start to get into priorities. A few other things I know Jamie and Don and myself wanted to talk about was looking at strategy for next year's recruitment. And then starting to work through our work plan, which we could then approve at one of our formal meetings. An alternative to this might be just doing small focus groups or one-on-one meetings with myself, maybe roping Jamie and Donna to help with those, where you all could just share in a smaller setting, kind of what are your priorities? What do you see as the impact of this board? We could sum that up and bring it back to the board for discussion. And I'd love to hear other ideas if folks have another way where we can do some priority setting, work planning. If there's another model you've used in other venues that's worked well, or one that you think might work well for this board. Any other ideas folks want to throw out there in terms of a format, or any thoughts about those other options, either kind of small focus groups or a reformatted board meeting that's more in kind of a session? Work through those topics together.
Go ahead, Dixie.
I actually, so in the same vein, I think a group thing would be way more helpful, just in just also feeling more comfortable, and everyone getting to know people in a little less formal. Right? And I really liked what Nancy said. Actually, I think that would have helped me a little bit coming into it, is understanding better what we were trying to accomplish. Because, and again, I think some of it's timing, because it sounds like it was a weird year with doing the comp plan and stuff like that. So it felt more, I had this idea that we're like sustainability warriors, Issaquah. And it felt a little more administrative, which, I mean, it is also, it's government, but it would, I think, be impactful for future people, and even just for us to know, like, what are we trying to accomplish, and how are we doing it together, and agreeing on what that is, so that we're not, so that we're kind of a team moving forward in 2024, and so it doesn't feel fragmented, I guess. I think important. I really like that kind of stuff. Helpful. So.
Nancy, go ahead.
Well, I like the idea of a retreat and trying to get us together as a group. And the reason I think that is, I think it's good for us to, one, get to know each other a little better and what our strengths and weaknesses are. And to kind of, these folks that are newer to the board are struggling with some of the lingo and the language and what we've done. And it would give us that opportunity. But I would offer a suggestion that if we did something like this, we all should come prepared and have kind of like homework before we get there. And the homework, I would say, would be something along the lines of, what are your top 3 environmental priorities for the city? And what are your priorities for the board? Because I think they could be different. And I think if people come prepared with, it gives an opportunity for discussion. And it helps us understand how we can work with this group to accomplish something. Because right now we're hearing the administration's priorities being brought to us, and we can feed off some of that. That's great. But I think we all have something we want to see in this board, and that's why we signed up for it. And it would be great to kind of hear that from each of us in a more structured setting.
Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll also say how valuable I think that gathering would be. I I realized, like, as I listened to the conversations and the input that people are providing, I know nothing about the rest of the board members. And I want to know who has these background knowledge on topics and like who I could reach out to potentially to learn more about a specific subject that we're talking about. Or who just how we can kind of collaborate more effectively. And I think that an in-person meeting, obviously that I would be there in person for this meeting. And so I think that would be really valuable to be able to actually see everybody in person, have some informal, formal time together to build more of that cohesiveness within the board and kind of knowledge sharing as well.
Yeah, the other thing that springs to mind for me is like, there's the beginning of the year that's really important. There's also like May when we have new board members, that's really important. And I think having informal time that people can get to know each other, especially when we have some people remote, I think it would be really helpful. And we've talked about doing, it sounds like that might be a good time to do like a purely social or like some way to like at least get everyone to know each other. And then early in the year, it does seem like something where we have time to like, we don't have other agenda items. Our agenda is to talk about what we think is important. I think the other piece that I already mentioned, I would love to hear like a call for like, we're however many, 12 people in the city, and there's a big city of people that have other, like, I still think that there's some aspect of feedback that I'd love to not only have our work plan, but also like, what are we hearing feedback like from the community? Is that like in Issaquah newsletter, it's like, what do you care about in the environment? Like submit your topics, and maybe that's something that can generate some ideas that I think our group will have plenty of ideas, but hopefully some new blood or new ideas into the mix. So
an interesting thing when Alex said something about like as we all get together, like, we don't know necessarily what everybody's backgrounds are, or even like what the access is that we have in Issaquah. And so being able to kind of not only piggybacking on Nancy's where we come, prepared, but we also kind of come with like, hey, what do I bring to the sport that might be important? Like, what am I the expert in? And so, maybe we come up with a topic and we're like, okay, we all have an opinion, but maybe somebody's got a background that really helps us. Because when you said that, I thought, well, I got an email list with 6,000 people on it. They're all Issaquah residents, but happy to talk about their opinions of Issaquah, So like, we probably have more access than we think just by, putting our heads together and going, oh, wait, you do that and you do that. And wait, we actually have a lot here that maybe we're so aware of because we haven't really had that interaction. So.
All right, I'm not sure between Alex and Tom, but Tom, and then we'll come back to you, Alex.
Okay, thank you, Jamie.
Oh, and Nancy, sorry, there's so many.
Yeah, it's a real conundrum to figure out the whole priority thing. Like, well, there will always be too many things to talk about. We could never talk about everything that could be talked about. In this year, everything that was brought to the board, I think was appropriate to be brought to the board, but yet I'm one of those who expressed concern about too much material. Okay, so what gives? Well, okay, you just have to make your best shot at establishing priorities and focus on it. I was kind of impressed by the process and the discipline used in the capital plan, where, okay, here's this spreadsheet, here's these multiple columns of evaluation, the pros and cons, impacts of each of these things, because there's always too many things we don't have enough money to do all the things. Okay, so we have to in the same sense. And so putting a little bit more objective discipline in the process of establishing the priorities of what's brought to the board, I think would be helpful. At least, I mean, as an engineer, that's how I would approach it. Let's make it more objective. Let's establish a criteria for why something is of enough value to bring to the board, and crank on through that process. And okay, let's get everybody's opinion about each of these categories of evaluation, and then tally it up, and whatever gets the highest scores, we get to hear it, and those things, other things are pushed out. We don't live in a perfect world. Another possibility, and I know this is probably not practical, but okay, so we make some subcommittees to focus on particular topics and push some of that detail work into a subcommittee. And I don't know, that has a whole new layer of infrastructure from city support, et cetera, and quorums. I don't know, it's probably not practical, but anyway, that is something that could be done. You know, maybe not now, but maybe someday, as another way to kind of expand the scope of what we can cover and yet not give it to a cursory level by the whole group, but have a focus group that looks at it at a more deep level. And over myself, I would rather pick a few areas of interest and become more deeply involved in a few areas of interest. Even though I have some interest in these other things, I'm willing to focus for the sake of doing a good job in a particular area. That's how I would prefer to approach it. But that's my objective approach as an engineer, sort of thing kicking in. Thank you.
Alison and Nancy.
I want to go back to just a couple of things that were stated a little bit ago. Jamie, you mentioned like gathering around May again to have a more social gathering after new members come on. I think that's a great idea. I think it would be really helpful to have that planned or like a date set aside early on. So as you're doing recruitment of members, that's on their calendar of something. When I came on was right when the field trips were happening, and it just didn't work out with my schedule because it was right there. And that I was learning about them as I was learning about the board. So I wasn't able to attend any of those field trips. And then I just kind of had a question about how does the general public actually find out about the topics that we're talking about, or these meetings outside of just like looking at the city calendars or when the public notice is made? Is there an opportunity for us, like Dixie said, to spread that through our connections a little bit more? Or is there an opportunity to host a specific, more community gathering feedback meeting where we really broadcast and ask for that? I know there's going to be some around some specific messaging coming out about some of the products that have been developed or the reports that have been developed. So maybe that's an opportunity to then also ask for feedback from the community about what their priorities are for us to focus on.
Yeah, just a brief, great suggestion around kind of booking a May date for orientation. And then in terms of how information is communicated out to the public for these meetings, that is just done through the community calendar. We have a very short list of interested parties that I CC when I distribute the agenda, that folks that have asked to be on that mailing list. They can definitely be sent out more widely. We do have a sustainability listserv. We haven't explicitly asked if folks on that listserv would want to receive information. That is something we can do, and we've talked about updating that listserv. Last year, the mayor did a sustainability open house, which I thought was a nice way to showcase a little bit about what the environmental board was doing. I think the board could definitely host something like that again. We could also have a table at the sustainability fair. We could put together a survey. We can absolutely do more ways of getting out in the public and figure out ways to get input on the board's priorities. So open to any and all suggestions.
Thank you, Stacey. Oh. Nancy and then Crouch.
So 2 comments on 2 different things. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Stacey said first, and that is, I think that's a great topic for the retreat. How do we reach out to the public and get more input into the overall board? I mean, I think that's something we could bring to the table and have a conversation about and think about. But the other thing I wanted to point out is, in my opinion, the board's been missing the 2 students that we have are supposed to have as part of the board, particularly this year. Participation has been down considerably more than it was in the previous year. And I think we need to reach out to the students and see what we can do to get them to participate in a retreat and to get their interest our student members into the overall board, because there's a reason the council and the mayor identified 2 positions on this board for them. And we need to see if we can't get them more actively involved. That's it.
Go ahead, Brad.
Hi. So I just wanted to add something on the first Jamie's comment on, how to reach the community, and then everybody has commented on it. I agree with that. I have seen some surveys, I think from city of Sammamish, at least some city, where they have actually asked for public feedback, but I don't remember if it was specific to parks or not necessarily for a construction project. It was not a public hearing or anything. It was actually a survey link sent out to the public. And I have provided feedback couple of times. So we could do something like that. And I know Stacy also mentioned that. Stacy, I thought sustainability group had a podcast or a YouTube channel or something like that, or at least I had seen something. So maybe that would be a way to, ask for feedback. That would be other thing. To Nancy's point of, engaging more students, we could also reach out to the schools in Issaquah School District, especially high schools, green teams and all, and ask them if they are interested in providing any, ideas, which especially high schools is because, these are little bigger kids, they are more, involved in it. So we could do that as well. These are just a few ideas at the top of my head. And I think the retreat is a great idea.
Thanks, Raj. All right. Well, it sounds like there is interest in a retreat work session. So what I will do is work with the clerks and Jamie and Dawn to figure out the structure of that and put together an agenda. I had already checked in with the clerks about some potential dates because we have a lot of conflicts with other boards, commissions, and then cultural and religious holidays. So we do have one date in January and one in February that would be potential. I will send those out to you all because we would ideally like to have everyone there. And so see if there's conflicts in any of those dates. It's a late January and then I think the 7th of March. So I'll get those out to the board tomorrow. Yeah, really great input, great topics that were brought up tonight that we could cover at that retreat. And I will also work to see if we can get the mayor or elected officials or even some of the department heads that we work with a lot to join for part of the discussion. That's appropriate. Great. Okay. Any other thoughts around the next work session or other reflections on the self-analysis where we should take action? Well, with that, we did want to go back to the board report, of which the self-analysis is one piece, and open it up for any discussion on revisions to the report. I can pull it up. And then move into a vote on whether or not the board approves the report for submission to council.
Just as a quick refresher on how this will go, and a refresher partially just for me to state it out loud and see if that what I'm saying is wrong. But so we'll ask any questions about kind of before any motions are made, any questions to Stacy or otherwise, any comments that might need to be made before then. And then I'll ask for basically the floor to be like someone to make a motion, and the motion would be, I think, one of 3 options. It's recommend that we approve the letter as presented, or the board report as presented, approve it with revisions that we would dictate, or not recommend it forward. And so someone makes a motion, there would be someone either seconds it or someone doesn't second it. If someone seconds it, then it would go into discussion. Any amendments from that point, basically, if someone wants to amend what the motion is, that amendment has to be handled before we go back to the motion. So it's basically like you kind of in a vacuum talk about that amendment and then come back to the broader motion for discussion. And then ultimately what we're trying to get to at the end of the day is a vote to decide on a motion that so or correction. Did I get that right, Stacy? So yeah, I think with that being said, now would be the time if there's any kind of general questions or anything else that board wants to discuss prior to us taking action. Nancy, go ahead.
So I just went back and looked at the board report again, and I would like to see another section added to it. And that is before you get to the appendices, just a small section saying that we discussed having, as part of our self-assessment, we discussed having a board retreat to set our priorities and invite council members, administration, and the mayor to participate in it. And I think that discussion should happen in there so that they know that we're trying to set our priorities and kind of provide more leadership along the way. And I would like to see that added to the board report, just as a paragraph or a very small subsection and in the first 2 pages of the board report.
Great.
Any other questions or if not, there's formal action requested on this item. So is there anyone willing to make a motion? Nancy, I don't know, did you put your hand down?
Yeah, I did again. I moved to approve the annual board report and submit it to the council with amendment added to it to include a discussion about having a retreat to set priorities with the language approved by the board chair and vice chair prior to submittal.
Now we need a second.
A second.
Right, now we will discuss the motion. So any comments or questions? Nancy, if you want, you can lead since it was your motion. If you have anything to say.
Oh, I just tried to summarize the feedback I provided earlier, and I think that Jamie and Dawn are more than capable of approving whatever language gets put in that. So that's all I have to say.
All right, any other questions or comments? Okay, now I think we'll move. Right now, we'll move to a vote. So Stacey, takes the roll call vote.
Tom Anderson,
Aye.
Nancy Davidson,
Aye.
Jamie Finch,
Aye.
Praj Gopandi,
Aye.
Ann Newcomb. Aye. And we'll have Janet and Dixie are going to vote tonight as regular members. Janet Wall.
Aye.
Dixie Bear.
Aye.
And Alex Lee Tigner.
Aye.
Well, it sounds like that motion. Everyone. And then we'll follow up with.
Yes.
Language.
I'll send you those revisions.
And I think with that, Stacey, do you have anything else on the report and self-analysis?
No, I do have some quick reports.
Now we'll move on to reports.
Great. Well, thank you again for all the feedback. Really excited for 2024 and to meet with the board and set priorities. So just a few quick updates, some council updates, and wanted to highlight some of the upcoming council decisions. Council did recently approve hiring a full-time solid waste analyst. This position is going to relieve 5+ staff and several consultants that have been working on solid waste and really help to centralize that under a single position. The sustainability team will work closely with the solid waste analysts on making progress towards the solid waste goals in the ICAP. Last night, council did have a meeting with legislatures to talk through legislative priorities. It is a short legislative session this year, so council had a pretty short list of priorities but it did include several transportation-related initiatives, including preparations for light rail. I did want to note as well that the King County Cities Climate Collaborative, K4C, did develop a pretty extensive list of climate-related priorities for this legislative session. I'm happy to share those out with the board, but that is being advanced by the executive. Coming up with council, David Reedy will be doing a brief presentation on the decarbonization, the building decarbonization resolution that this board supported. We did present to a council committee this last Tuesday. They were supportive of it, but did request a brief presentation with council January 2nd. So that will be going to full council. Also in January, they will see a Solar Plus Storage grant, which is supporting our Resilience Hub project. And that will go to them for approval. David and possibly Kathleen will be back to talk more about that project next year. And then upcoming for council is also a review of other elements of the comprehensive plan. Did want to flag that there are a couple of reports in the packet. These are primarily follow-up reports to you on topics that have either been brought through a presentation or a previous report. Jen Davis-Hayes, our Economic Development Manager, provided an update on the Pioneer project, which recently went before council. At this time, there are not any extra sustainability incentives that look like will be included in that project, but that's something she would like to discuss further with us in the future. There's a report on the sewer master plan update that was presented to a council committee in November. Matt Ellis wanted to provide that to the board as it's a nice summary of all the environmental board feedback that was provided earlier in the year and how that feedback was addressed in the plan update. And then the last item, yes, what's up?
That was great that he did that.
Oh, great. Yeah, and that will be going to the council later in 2024. And then there is a update or a troll, I had in my notes, troll wetland report. Just an update on the mitigation that was done for the troll and a study that was done because it was in a wetland buffer. Christian just shared with me that there was mitigation that was done on that site. They are going to continue to apply wood chips throughout the life of that project. Some of you may have noticed a new sign there that was installed with each of the sites for the trolls. And my understanding is there is also a sign that's being developed with the tribe that'll really highlight highlight the wetlands in the area and talk about the value of wetlands. So more the ecosystem focus for educating the public and visitors to the troll. There is also a mitigation plan that will go into effect once the troll is no longer there, which lifespan's estimated around 3 years. And then just upcoming topics for the environmental board. While I recognize we will be working in January or early February to set priorities, the two topics we are planning to bring to you all in January is the 2022 greenhouse gas emissions inventory report. David will be sharing information with you on the community inventory and our first city municipal operations inventory. We will be going to council with that presentation in February, so we're really hoping to get some feedback from the board on what should be presented to council, any input that you have on the results and the way that it's reported before we go to council. And then the other main topic for January we're anticipating would be Kathleen will share some of the communication tools and concepts that we're working on coming out of the climate vulnerability assessment and seeking feedback on those. And then I did want to flag, we are anticipating a couple of special meetings for the board. As last year, we try not to do too many of these. They are seeming to end up kind of early in the year for some reason. We'll be looking at that work planning retreat And then late January, we will need a special meeting to review the full environment element or the environmental stewardship and climate resilience element of the comprehensive plan. That's because of the timing for when it goes to PPC and council. We just weren't able to fit it into one of our regular meetings. And then the other potential one is February 5th. This is when we'll be meeting with council to present the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and they've asked for a presentation on the environmental board retreat. So we could talk about that in January, whether that's Jamie and Dawn. If other members of the board want to be there, we can also set that as a special meeting if we're going to have 5 or more. But just wanted to flag those dates, and I will also send those out in a follow-up email. That's all I had.
Any other business on the board? Okay, you're adjourned then.
Thank you. I will, as folks are leaving the room here, I was going to share a video. I will post that for you all in the chat. This was a video put together by sustainability ambassadors. Feel free to watch on your own time. It's pretty fun. Janet got a preview here because she was here early. But thank you, Praj, Nancy, Alex. Have a great enjoy the holidays, and we will see